Thank you, guys. To me, February 14th will never be Valentine's Day again. A day of admiration and compassion celebrated all over the world developed into something so catastrophic in a matter of minutes. I will always remember hiding in a dark classroom, shaking beyond belief, even though I knew the shooter was on the other side of the campus. I will always remember that I was in the same building just 15 minutes before, delivering carnations to my fellow classmates. I will always remember my mind constantly repeating, "It could have been me. It could have been me." I will always remember my thoughts evolving into, "It still can be me. The shooter hasn't been caught yet. It still can be me." However, after the 2 longest hours of my life, I finally escaped Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, ushered out by FBI agents, and a SWAT team. Police sirens wailed around me, but all I could seem to hear was the thumping of my broken heart. My body tried giving in to my exhaustion, but I forced my legs to maintain a rapid speed on my race home, hurtling over Valentine's Day teddy bears thrown erratically on the streets of Parkland. I kept turning around to focus my eyes on a 3-story building that now held an unknown amount of newly murdered bodies, a building that was flooded with unjustified hate on a day of true love. Thousands of people in my community would now have to redefine their new normal, a normal filled with anxiety attacks, memorial visits, and vacant desks. The morning after the shooting, my eyes opened at a miserable 6 a.m. to see 17 names plastered all over social media. My ear-piercing screams rang throughout the house until my throat felt like it caught fire. Jamie Guttenberg, Aaron Feiss, Joaquin Oliver. These were people I saw just yesterday walking the streets of my ordinary high school, but now are forever ingrained in history as victims of a massacre. Before the shooting at my high school on February 14th, 2018, I was just a normal high school student living in a small town unknown to most. In just 6 minutes and 20 seconds, however, my town became the epicenter of the world as 17 hearts stopped beating. 17 brothers, sisters, parents, friends, mentors, coaches, students were murdered in our classrooms and hallways. Another 17 people were injured with physical wounds that might heal, but emotional wounds that would never. The shooting in Parkland joined the list of the worst mass shootings in American history, a list that no one wants to be a part of. You know, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not reminded of the shooting. When I hear the sounds of sirens or fireworks, I'm taken back to that horrific afternoon. Yet, our community isn't alone in its tragedy. In 2017, nearly 40,000 Americans died as a result of guns, an average of 109 people a day. There were 24 school shootings that resulted in gun-related deaths or injuries in 2018 alone. The worst part is, far too many stories of gun violence go untold or are forgotten as the American society willingly moves on. Young people, specifically those who reside in low socioeconomic areas, grow up with gun violence as their reality. Days without gunshots as their background noise seem unusual. Perhaps the one thing that is worse than the continued violence is the normalization of it. We are coerced by continual propaganda into believing that this reality cannot be changed, as guns have completely and totally fused themselves into our culture. When I got home from the shooting, I quickly recognized that I could not sit back and watch the gun lobby win once more. I couldn't allow the everlasting list of mass shootings to continue to grow. I needed my still beating heart and my still functioning brain to be put towards something that could benefit others. So I shoved one more factor into what would become my new normal: civic engagement. The next day, the city of Parkland held a vigil at our local soccer field. It was the largest gathering that my town had ever seen. Thousands stood side by side in silence to commemorate the lives we lost just a day before. You know, I'd grown up seeing pictures of huge vigils, as I'm sure all of you have too, to honor victims of gun violence, but never in my wildest dreams would I have thought one day a vigil would occur in my community. And once the ceremony concluded, I navigated my way through the crowd towards the stage where a US Congresswoman stood. Now, this was totally out of character for me. I was never involved in politics, and I was definitely more introverted than I was extroverted. But all fear seemed to leave my body because I told myself I was a vessel for change. I was still alive, and because of that privilege, I just couldn't sit back. So I didn't give her the choice but to listen to my plan to bring Stoneman Douglas students up to Tallahassee, the Florida state capital, to push for gun safety legislation on a state level. I was expecting to hear a "it's too soon to get political" comment, but because that's usually how it goes after mass tragedies like this. But instead, I spotted a little glimmer of hope in her eyes. She thanked me for wanting to stand up so soon and immediately connected me with a Florida state senator. And from that day forth, I worked on and successfully organized a trip for 100 of my classmates to travel to our state capital and engage in over 70 different congressional meetings. But it wasn't only me who felt this calling to speak out. Many of my friends in Parkland, along with millions of young people around the country, and I'm sure a lot of you are sitting in this audience today, were suddenly so aware that we were the ones who could break the cycle of gun violence in the US. We couldn't have done it without journalists who were ready and willing to let us share our own stories. The coverage in Parkland spread widely and quickly, allowing students from the smallest of towns to join in on the movement to save lives. And not only did traditional media allow us to thrive, but we also created our own platforms using social media, which helped us to galvanize and educate young people in the US about one of the most pressing issues of our time. Using memes, statistics, and bold language, our social media platforms blew up and got more eyes than we could have ever predicted. Heck, we expected 90 people to come to the march at first. Social media, however, served to make our presence known to elected officials, the opposition, and the American people as a whole. Arguably, the more important aspect, though, was that it became our #1 tool to connect with organizers that were just as passionate to end gun violence in their communities. Together, young people from many corners of the country organized the March for Our Lives in Washington, D.C., one of the largest youth-led protests in U.S. history, where about 1 million people joined us in our fight. It created a national, even international uproar, making the issue of gun violence #1 among young people in this country. Parkland students like me demanded justice side by side with students and young people from all walks of life. We shared stories of loss and called out our politicians as their complacency kills us every single day. The March in DC worked in conjunction with over 900 sibling marches all over the world, creating a sense of global solidarity against all types of violence. All children, no matter their country of origin, deserve to feel safe in their schools, their streets, and their homes. The March for Our Lives welcomed everyone with a sense of unity. It was the first time in a long time that many people in the US felt hope. We wanted to continue to spread that hope as far as we could, which is why we dedicated our summer last year to traveling to communities around the US on our Road to Change tour, having town hall conversations and registering tens of thousands of voters. The participants on tour were not only students from Parkland, but from all over the US, giving a platform to students from communities of color that experience everyday gun violence. We bused to over 100 different cities in over half of the states in America and met hundreds of people that will never get to see their sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, girlfriends, boyfriends ever again, their lives stolen from a bullet. You know, one time was actually here in Charlottesville, where my friends and I had a conversation with Susan Bro, the mother of Heather Heyer, the victim of the August 12th tragedy 2 years ago now. When we sat down with her, Susan she could have talked about her pain and trauma and loss, but what she spoke about the whole time was her pride in young people in her community, you guys, and beyond. She sees a constant drive in young people to do something and to fix society's ills. She's hopeful for what's to come and understands that her daughter was not taken in vain. She and this community motivates me, inspires me to keep going because of its great fortitude, beauty, and compassion. Months after the tour, young people were still getting inspired to make a change in their communities. In fact, our recent midterm election in America showed a revolutionary youth voter turnout, if y'all didn't know, a turnout higher than it's been in over 25 years, leading to a more representative government than our country has ever seen. A media analysis published by The Trace, a nonprofit news organization that tracks gun issues, actually found that in the 3.5 months after the shooting in my hometown, the number of news stories mentioning guns was more than double the number that appeared following any of the 7 worst mass shootings since 2013. Some national polls showed that gun policy had zoomed up to 3rd or 4th among priorities for voters heading into the midterm elections, after economy and healthcare, but even before immigration and taxes. I mention these statistics because they explicitly prove the power of young people. There is a hero and a change maker in every young person, and the goal of March for Our Lives is not only to end gun violence, but to inspire all of the untapped youth, untapped energy in the US and beyond. Young people in this moment in history, regardless of political affiliation, understand exactly why we need to have more urgency than ever before when it comes to saving our own lives. Leadership is about taking responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. Right now, our country is greatly lacking empathy, and you all in this room are the ones that can cure that. I have been exhausted by indifference and ineptitude and inspired by the desperate need for change, which is why I have been motivated to be a change maker, and you can too. We are a generation that knows that if a problem affects one of us, it affects all of us. A generation that advocates for a system that fights for us and not a system that we have to fight. We must all be bold in our calls for change, intersectional in our demands for equity and safety, and relentless in our quest for justice. Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to invite Kathryn Bradshaw from the Curry School at UVA, and we're just going to have a little moderated conversation. Kathryn.
Hi, you're so incredible. Every time I hear you talk, it makes me choke up a little bit, so I'll try to get through this. And it's really so inspiring, and it's so inspiring to have so many youth leaders here in the audience here today. So hopefully we'll cultivate a little bit of local interest and local leadership around some of the inspiring thoughts that you have. But you're so, talk down all this kind of leadership stuff that you had. You're like, you describe yourself as a normal kid, just not every kid gets up out of bed and says, I'm going to start a social movement as a result of this. So were there kind of seeds of this before this event? Kind of what was your trajectory before? You described yourself as, when we were chatting earlier, as being a little bit shy even, kind of help us know a little bit more about you and your personality, and that might also empower some other kids in the audience that are thinking, I'm a little too shy to get up in front of this big audience of people to kind of give a talk, much less start a social movement.
Yeah. I mean, I felt that way this time a year ago, but through the course of middle school and high school, I was always involved in, extracurricular activities like Key Club and my student government. And so I guess, understanding leadership on a school level allowed me to, learn how to delegate and organize on a grander scale. I mean, obviously it was a process. I've made a lot of mistakes, which is okay. But, I was just like any other, involved teenager, and I just felt this need to do something after such a tragedy and really grab onto the media attention we were getting and, talk about what happened, but also use that attention to transition the conversation to something that would be productive and helpful for other communities to prevent something like this from happening again.
And so you obviously started this initiative, and then you had some good friends that were involved too. Were there any other friends that were like, I'm going to kind of take a pass at this, or others that you hadn't really connected with before that said, I really want to join arms with you? Like, how's the peer network kind of aspect of that when you have friends that might be a little less comfortable being in the public eye, and others that you may not have connected with before but really wanted to be part of this?
Yeah, after the shooting, it was definitely a very sensitive environment in Parkland, which is why, the initial group that started March for Lives was pretty small because everyone was just dealing with their, grief, because we started March for Lives 2 days after. So, I think that my coping mechanism was, using activism as kind of a distraction, essentially, because I didn't want to be alone in my thoughts, and that's kind of what happened. But there was a lot of people that were not ready to speak out. I was so fortunate to not be in the building where the shooting actually occurred. I was somewhere else on campus. So I didn't have, the same experience as someone that was in the building, which is why I wanted to make sure that we were, again, using that media attention immediately, because, we see this happening, far too often these days, and media coverage and mass tragedies like this go away after 1-2 weeks, and I knew we had to, grasp it then.
And so when you think about the kind of early stage of this, what were some of the early barriers that you all faced, and then what were some of the early people that kind of reached out to help you overcome some of those barriers?
Yeah, I mean, it was all very overwhelming at first, and I would say the initial barriers were, one, we didn't know how to organize a march, so we definitely did get help, but we largely were the ones that created the strategy, created the, what moments we wanted to have on stage at the march, and what we wanted the future of March for Lives to look like. And a lot of the barriers we had initially were, we were really sensitive because we had just gone through a mass tragedy in our community, and then people were attacking us on social media, saying we were crisis actors, saying that, the shooting never happened. And it was obviously very offensive because, you can't just disregard someone's trauma like that, but over the course of time, we've learned that, for every negative comment, there's 100 positive ones, and that, the hate just stems from ignorance.
Well, and it's interesting to hear you talk about your kind of living out your own trauma in the media in front of other people. And what were some of those early things that other schools could do in events like this that would happen to help people heal from a traumatic experience like this, but also empower youth voice and advocacy when it's appropriate?
Yeah, I mean, after anything like this or something, whether it be a suicide in a community, any type of threat, even a shooter drill, which I'm sure all of us have experienced, it's just important to make sure that a student is communicating with their administration, their school board, to make sure that they actually have proper mental health access, because I'm sure our guidance counselors in our schools are not actually there to guide us, they're there to help with our schedules. And we definitely need to make sure we have an appropriate ratio of mental health counselors in our schools to not only prevent something like this, but just to help the basic, stressors of what middle school, high school brings. I think that a lot of people, unfortunately, can relate to, this whole mass shooting epidemic. I know that there's so many teenagers around the country that are terrified to go to school because, they never know if it's going to be them next. When they're terrified to go to their corner store because they don't know if they're going to get shot in their street. And so it's about building community and not letting that fear win, and organizing to prevent something like that from happening in your own community.
And I really appreciate your talking about some of the mental health services. Actually, that's what a lot of my team kind of focuses on, is thinking about how we can push more of those services out into the schools and reduce things like stigma about getting help.
Definitely.
And we talk a lot about prevention, trying to prevent problems before they happen. And one way that we can learn about potential situations is from kids, like listening to kids when they're concerned about a friend and things like that.
Yes.
And sometimes kids are like, oh, I don't want to tell an adult because I'm worried the kid's going to get in trouble. But, after these kind of events, quite often a lot of people said, well, I kind of knew there was something off about them, or that they had access to a weapon. How can we kind of change that norm where kids just keep things to themselves or don't really approach adults? There's a lot of concern about snitching and things like that. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about how we could change some of that.
I think a lot of it comes from the attitude of the administration and teachers, and having them create environments of just safe spaces. You can talk to me about anything type of thing, because far too often we see just teachers go into the classroom and say, we got to get this, this, and this done today, and that's it. But we never take time to reflect on ourselves, what we're going through. So I think it's really up to the teachers to be role models in situations like that. And honestly, I think of the mental health stigma is being broken down slowly but surely. I feel like, our generation is, understanding that going to therapy is okay. And, just coming from me, someone who has experienced something like a mass shooting in my community, it's always better to say something than to not. Because, there's just so many things that can be lost, but things can be prevented, and maybe there isn't actually something wrong, but it's always better to tell someone than to stay quiet. And you can tell someone that you trust, and they can communicate that to someone else. If you don't want to do that, there's always someone to help you. You're not alone in those situations.
And how do you stay kind of balanced during all this? What kind of stuff do you enjoy doing that helps you de-stress or helps you kind of take your mind off of serious or unfortunate things?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey over the past, year and a couple months now, trying to navigate that. But I really overworked myself, I would say, in the beginning of everything. Up until maybe August, I actually didn't go to therapy until 6 months after the shooting. Going through that, just complete avoidance of how I felt internally really proves to me now that, being honest with myself, having conversations with myself about how I'm feeling, and communicating with my friends and not being scared to tell others how I feel is so, so important. I just schedule days where, I can do whatever. I live close to a beach because I'm in Florida, so that's really nice. So I just go to the beach, or I hang out with my friends that I don't oftentimes see because I'm so wrapped up in my March for Our Lives friends now. So it's definitely about finding a balance and finding what's right for you. But my activism does have some type of healing mechanism that helps me. Just speaking about what I went through definitely is a type of, coping mechanism.
So you described this kind of launch of this initiative, and at some point it seemed like you probably hit an inflection point or a tipping point where it just kind of took on a life of its own, and you weren't having to push quite as much, but were having to almost pull back or kind of balance all the demands on your time. Was there a certain point where you said, wow, this is really caught on, I don't know if I'm really ready to keep going with this? Or did you ever feel like it wasn't moving fast enough? Kind of how did you feel about the pace and the tipping point aspect of this initiative?
Yeah, the march just was this unbelievable event. And how I knew that this momentum was continuing was the fact that there were so many people still supporting us in person over the summer, months after the shooting, months after the march. And it never became too much for me because we always had more people coming into the circle, more people helping, more people taking the stage and talking about their stories. So it was a lot about not only talking about, Parkland, but about talking about every other aspect of gun violence, whether it be everyday gun violence, whether it be suicides, which actually cause 2/3 of the gun deaths in this country, domestic violence. So definitely sharing the stage was not only the right thing to do, but it was also helpful in regards to, my stamina. And, we're definitely building the foundation of March for Our Lives going into the 2020 elections so we can do a lot more voter registration and tap into a lot more communities and young people that want to, work and want to do, pushes on their middle school campuses, high school campuses, college campuses, because that's where the real stuff happens and you get to, reach into that untapped youth population.
There's some things that you think kids are better at doing around this, or you really need to tap into adults, or how have you all accessed different resources or different people to kind of get the word out or the message out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've definitely had like a weird balance of adults wanting to help, but it's a youth-led movement and a youth-run movement. So, we accept all the support, and I actually help a lot with our chapter network. And so they always ask me, like, what do I do when there's an adult that wants to, like, infiltrate? And I'm like, just have them,
Or worse yet, a researcher,
Just have them support you guys, bring you food or something, because, like, I think the most important part about the success of March for Our Lives is the fact that it is youth-run, because gun violence disproportionately affects young people. So it's so important to have young people actually devising strategy on how to fix this issue. So, no offense to adults, y'all are great, and we're gonna be adults one day.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're what we would call in the research an emerging adult. And
yes.
So up next for you is Harvard. Tell us about the next couple of years and how you anticipate kind of passing the baton to others and what you anticipate your role will be in both the movement and kind of next steps for you.
Yeah, fully aware that I'm going to be an adult very soon, and I'm looking forward to, supporting even younger people in, hopefully not, gun violence prevention, because hopefully that's dealt with in the next couple of years, but whether it be, environmentalism or whatever. So yeah, I'm off to Harvard in the fall. I'm super excited because, I'm going to take a step back from my national duties and just work locally in my community, because the local grassroots work is actually where the most gets done. So I'm looking forward to doing stuff on my campus and, delving into other aspects of activism, because I do care about a lot, especially because I'm now so interested in, the political science. I'm going to be concentrating in government. So I am very grateful and privileged to be heading off there, and I am going to use my education for good.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us here today.